Welcome to Unit 2, Ancient Mediterranean. This is going to be the first presentation of many. So Unit 2 is a huge unit, and I've broken it down into 4 different parts. 2.1 would be your Near East, the Mediterranean, and that would range from 3500 to 330 BCE. It's modern day Iraq, and it's part of a huge greater region. It's comprised nowadays of modern nations such as Egypt, Iran, Syria, Jordan, Israel, Lebanon, Gulf states, and Turkey. Today we refer to it as the Near or Middle East. So if you can take notes while you're viewing this presentation, you also have a moment to pause it while you're taking notes. This is a very interesting fact that there's now writing, because in the Paleolithic, the first unit, Unit 1, it was hard for us to even understand why those artifacts are around, well, what they're used for. So there was something called cuneiforms, and they're pretty cool. This was their pieces of paper, or even their way of communicating. And it's a clay tablet that was wedged with shapes and forms, and it was their form of writing. Now, the neat way of reading this type of object is you actually read it from top down, and then completely different from our civilization, right to left. These cuneiforms, they consisted of contracts, maybe agricultural lists, trade, legal documents, and the priests were actually in charge of these types of documents. They were signed with something called cylinder seals, and it was carved with representations that indicate political status. And that can also change over time, as obviously politics change over time. There are also some pictures that would be found as well, and that right there is pictographs. So at this point, go ahead and get your sheet out. It looks like this. It's a chart. And through 2.1, you're going to be taking notes on each civilization through presentations, but we're going to be concentrating just on Sumer, which is the first column. The Sumerians were innovators, and they to me are very fascinating because they were the earliest, and they were pretty smart because they knew that this valley between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, which is now called the Fertile Crescent, was a good place to grow crops. And there they decided to irrigate it, so that made it possible to even have more food. And wherever there's water, there'd become a population that would rise, and then of course there would be houses, or even later that we'll learn about, temples. What's very interesting, however, is that it was comprised of a dozen or so independent city-states under the protection of different deities. They also lacked stone for building and precious metals and timbers. So what they relied on is they would trade their agricultural products to secure these type of materials that they didn't have. And of course, that large-scale irrigation system required labor and also required extensive farming, which was managed by a centralized authority. Over large numbers of people were in urban centers, and it definitely gave Mesopotamia a special position in the history of this Western culture. It's actually the first time that there's ample food and a strong administrative class which developed. So we're going to look at the first form, the Ziggurat. And this is also a handout. So what I would recommend, this is going to be turned in. So if you will get that out, you're going to take notes from this presentation onto your Ziggurat form. However you want to take it, it's up to you. There's a front, and then there's a back. So at this time, go ahead and get that out. If you need to, you can pause it. So the Ziggurat means a built raised platform. So that's what Ziggurat actually stands for, a built raised platform. So this here is the Ziggurat, what you see to be brown, and that's made out of mud bricks. So the raised platform is called a Ziggurat. This is a temple. So the temple has been built on the Ziggurat. Okay. And consider, if you want to, the ziggurat is kind of like a chopped off pyramid. So as the pyramid would go up, you will see that kind of got chopped off here so that they could build a rectangular temple on top. Like I said, they were made out of mud bricks because that was the only real material of choice because stone was extremely rare. And where they placed this was very important. It was like a focal point in the city. So it had to be symbolic. And the sunlight would actually shine on what is the white bricks of the temple, and it kind of made this sparkle. So it was a very, very, very striking temple as well. So that's why for CED, it's called the White Temple and it's Ziggurat. So here's what is there now. And you can tell the White Temple is no longer, but we can kind of see maybe where a ramp was. But this is how large the ziggurat was in their time. So they were at the heart of the theocratic political system, and theocracy is a type of government where God is recognized as the ruler. And the god that they believe the temple was built for was Anu, A-N-U. Anu was supposedly their sky god. So the temple is for their god. And what's interesting is that it towers over the city and it makes a visual connection to whatever god or goddess that's honored there. And it's also recognized that deity's political authority. Now, although there was a religious belief that may have inspired the participation in such a project, but there's been no doubt some sort of unpaid labor was coerced by the state that involves slavery. The sides of the ziggurat were very broad and sloping, but broken up by recessed stripes or bands from top to bottom. So you can kind of see those stripes and bands right here. And it would make for a stunning platform for the temple. Now, the only way up to the top of the ziggurat was via a steep stairway right here that you can see in this recreation. A very steep stairway that led to a ramp that wrapped around the north end of the ziggurat. And then it brought you to the temple entrance here. Quite dramatic entrance, if you imagine climbing up that. Just so that you know what the materials are, the flat top of the ziggurat right here, see how it's nice and flat? This was actually coated with bitumen. And bitumen is asphalt. It's like a tar, a pitch-like material that we use for like paving our roads today. However, this particular bitumen was overlaid with brick, and it was pretty firm and waterproof foundation. And that's the foundation they built the White Temple on. Now, the temple gets its name for the fact that it was entirely whitewashed, White Temple, whitewashed inside and out, which would have given it this like beautiful kind of gem-like dazzling brightness and strong sunlight. And as you can see here, it's very rectangular in form. And you have to also think about the heat in the Neres. So having it being white was quite smart, and also to give it that godlike brightness. Very few objects were found inside the White Temple. However, what they did find is so cool. So some archaeologists uncovered like 9 tablets of gypsum on the floor of the temple, and all of which had cylinder seal impressions that we talked about from cuneiforms. And they think that that might have reflected temple accounting. They also uncovered a foundation deposit of bones of perhaps a leopard and a lion in the eastern corner of the temple. So they're thinking maybe a ritual of burying objects and bones that might not have been uncommon in ancient architecture. So the construction of the monumental shrine, it says a great deal about the Sumerians' desire to provide a grandiose setting for the worship of their deities. So as you can see here above, it's quite high. They believed it was about 40 feet above street level. It is made of mud bricks. It looks large, but it actually did not accommodate a lot of people. They thought mainly priests and leaders were there, but not so much the commoners. It does stand up, obviously it's 40 feet above, and there's a corner oriented to the cardinal points of the compass, which is something we're going to see a lot in these early architectures. We thought about that with Stonehenge. So again, there's a reasoning behind where and how they placed the temple. There's a bent axis plan, and you can kind of see it here. And they thought it was possible that may not have had a ceiling. And they can infer perhaps because this was part of a worship to the sky god, so you'd want to see the sky. Here's more information that you would get from a graphic organizer. And you guys can look at this. Just pretty simple context for the time. They believed during this time there was about 40,000 population. And this does predate the Egyptian pyramids. So this would be in Sumer. And this will also be the second artwork, because you should have already looked at the standard of from the video on Friday. So 2 things for you to complete for this presentation. Number 1, complete the front and back of your Ziggurat worksheet. Take a picture of the front and back and email that to me, please, before Tuesday's class. And then I would also take the time, if I were you, to make a brief flashcard for you to have for studying purposes. Hope you enjoyed the White Temple and Ziggurat, and I will talk to you on Tuesday.